Welcome, welcome. My name is Katharina Theobald, and I'm the product manager for the risk management product at Gauntlet. Today, we'll be talking about how to remove risk via collateral factors. First, we'll talk about how collateral factors are used in risk management. We'll talk about how collateral factors impact users via risk-off liquidations, and then we'll talk about some solutions to the user experience. The key things I want you to take away from this presentation are that capital requirements change as market conditions change. Volatilities of assets, asset prices, liquidity depths for certain assets will change over time. Ignoring this will lead protocols to either be uncompetitive if parameters are set really conservatively, or insolvent if parameters are not set conservatively enough. The primary way to reduce insolvency risk in lending protocols is to lower collateral factors. It's not the only way, but it is a very important lever that we have, which is why we've chosen to talk about it today. Gauntlet partners with protocols to mitigate the impact of risk-off liquidations. Risk-off liquidations is when a user is involuntarily liquidated due to a collateral factor change. In that event, liquidators will pay back the borrows and seize the collateral from the platform. We'll discuss these in more detail. Gauntlet optimizes for the following objectives. The first and most important is value at risk. The value of insolvent debt expected under adverse market conditions, in our case represented as the 95th percentile on our dashboards. Value at risk is the debt that is not successfully repaid by liquidators and instead has to be paid out of protocol reserves and in some cases the treasury. The debt always has to be repaid so that liquidity providers, should they choose to retrieve their collateral, can do so at any time in the future. VAR matters because insolvency is an existential threat to the protocol and the DAO. Having a lower value at risk reduces the protocol's liabilities and increases its odds of long-term survival. Liquidations at risk, on the other hand, are a healthy part of lending protocols. Healthy liquidations mean that bad loans are discharged before they go insolvent, since crypto loans are generally over-collateralized. Liquidations at risk matter because liquidations contribute to a bad user experience. Protocols that mitigate liquidations will tend to acquire more borrowers than protocols that do not. And actively managed approaches to LAR outcompete the ones that don't. Borrower usage is simply the amount of supplied collateral that is being actively borrowed against. Borrower usage matters because it contributes to both the borrower and lender user experience. All else being equal, protocols with higher borrower usage provide a better rate of return to lenders and a more cost-effective source of capital for borrowers. Now let's look at a key market risk that protocols face, which is the risk of liquidation cascades. Here we see a chart of a liquidation cascade in ST-ETH. The y-axis is the net price deviation of ST-ETH, and the x-axis is the liquidation volume for that asset. For a moment, think of price as the independent variable. A small price change results in a relatively small drop in liquidity, which we see here at the beginning. But this creates a feedback loop. And as more liquidations occur, the price continues to drop ever more rapidly, resulting in increasingly large accounts getting liquidated, which you see as these larger steps towards the end. The impact of cascading liquidations can only be accurately estimated taking into account the path dependence and the specific baskets of collateral assets, distributions of liquidity, and so on. This is why we always consider user positions in our simulations, as they have a significant impact on the path of these cascades. Now, what can be done? So collateral factor reduction influences all three of our objectives. It is the best parameter that we have for taking risk off, and it can impact VAR and LAR in really meaningful ways. First, speaking about value at risk, all else being equal, if collateral factors for collateral assets of a certain type are lower, there's more collateral available to be liquidated in excess of the loan value. In a situation of cascading liquidations, this will provide more opportunity for loans backed by this collateral to be liquidated before the value of that collateral drops below that of the loan. Why would we not use liquidation incentive? The reason is that it's not a very useful lever because there are sharply diminishing returns once arbitrageurs are economical because of gas fees. Generally, the liquidation incentives are also between 5 and 10%, so there's a very limited range of what those can be set to. Similarly, the loan to value, also sometimes referred to as borrowing collateral factor, is not a useful lever because it only impacts future new borrow positions, and it doesn't constrain behavior after the position has already been established. Now let's talk about the impact of collateral factors on liquidations at risk. There's a very nuanced relationship between risk and collateral factors, which is clearly demonstrated in the case of LAR. Generally, if collateral factors for collateral assets of a certain type are lower, then liquidations at risk will be higher because they'll be eligible for liquidation sooner. But all else is not equal in many cases. Some recommendations to reduce collateral factors will reduce liquidations at risk. But how can that happen? So let's look at an example. A user deposits 20 WETH, 1 Bitcoin, and 200 Aave at prices of $2,000, $20,000, and $100 respectively. And they borrow 50,000 USDC. In a baseline sim, the user starts with $40,000 worth of WETH, $20,000 worth of WBTC, and $20,000 worth of Aave. Let's say this account gets liquidated at time step X, when the balances are 15,000 USD worth of WETH, 18,000 USD worth of WBTC, and $19,000 worth of Aave. If this account is liquidated, the liquidator would choose to liquidate Aave against USDC. This is because, for simplicity, liquidators frequently will select the highest value collateral to minimize the number of transactions. If you can get away with only liquidating one collateral, wouldn't you rather do that than seizing two different assets and trying to atomically process that liquidation? However, if the liquidation threshold of WETH is lowered, the liquidation could happen at an earlier time step, Y, when the balances are 21,000 USD worth of WETH, $19,000 worth of WBTC, and $19,000 worth of Aave. If this account is liquidated, the liquidator would choose to liquidate WETH against USDC. Since WETH is more liquid than Aave, the price impact of selling the asset from a liquidation of WETH are far less than that of selling Aave. So it would lead to less total liquidations. Finally, a note about borrow usage. Increasing collateral factors will lead to increased borrows, assuming customer risk profiles remain constant. They maintain their borrow usage rate, creating more value for users under favorable market conditions. The ability to increase collateral factors requires us to be able to reduce them when market conditions deteriorate, to take risk off the table. We always have to keep that in mind when setting and changing collateral factors. We always have to remember what is an acceptable amount that we can reduce a collateral factor with minimal impact on the user experience, when trying to increase collateral factors to increase borrow usage. Now let's talk through some liquidations. Let's talk through how liquidations occur. So collateral factor reductions can result in risk-off liquidations whenever a borrower position is close to having a health factor of 1. So if a user is very close to the threshold of being liquidated, if we lower that threshold, they will become immediately eligible for liquidation. This is bad for borrowers, and it's bad for protocols. Borrowers are in a position where they could lose their collateral when a condition has changed beyond what it was when they took out the loan. And it's bad for protocols because they're going to miss out on some revenue. They might anger a customer. This is, we will note, most likely to affect recursive borrowers who have a tendency to maximize positions very close to the threshold. So these are people that are looping their capital over and over through a protocol. Zero risk-off liquidations must be a non-goal. So if we accept that active risk management is necessary to stay competitive and solvent, and if we accept that collateral factor reductions are essential, then we must accept some rate of risk-off liquidations. This is for censorship resistance. So if protocols cannot close a position and they will not force a user to supply more collateral, oftentimes they have not conducted KYC and cannot get in touch with the borrower, then we need to have a scenario in which we're able to reduce risk kind of independently of specific user positions. Anything that requires a user action is fundamentally uncertain. The protocol will obviously always hope that a borrower is paying attention and will increase their collateral so that they do not get liquidated. But it is always never guaranteed. So let's talk about some solutions for the borrower user experience. So we can improve the user experience that in a way that is compatible with active risk management. So the first step is some pretty basic protections, which is to align with the community on the degree to which collateral factors may be changed in each proposal. This has kind of 2 effects. The first is stakeholder education. Stakeholders that actively read the forum posts will understand by how much a collateral factor could change. They'll leave an appropriate buffer in case that event happens. And there will also be snapshot votes. And so the community should align on how big of a change can be done at once. Speed means that you can increase collateral factors quicker, but it also means that there could be a higher amount of risk-off liquidations. The goal with this activity is always to ensure that the community is aligned and intentional about the approach to this trade-off. In addition, we always encourage our protocols to include kind of a warning or a label when borrower positions are opened, that governance can change these risk parameters throughout the life of a loan. The second kind of phase of maturity in this would be to modify some of the protocol contracts so that the changes are implemented gradually over time. This is referred to as linear interpolation. And a really great example of it exists in MakerDAO. They actually wrote some open source code for how they implement collateral factor changes gradually over time. This facility can be used to reduce the collateral factors, and it greatly reduces the chance that the borrower is subject to a risk-off liquidation. The third and kind of final, most advanced phase of managing the user experience is to push notifications to borrowers. This can be done in a variety of ways. It could be done by having borrowers sign up for these notifications to kind of subscribe through that flow. There are also some tools available in the market, such as push protocol, block scan chat that can kind of push notifications to different accounts. This would be an important way for contacting especially large whales that might be very close to liquidation. Some final thoughts about some other risk parameters. So collateral factor is the most important lever that we have for managing risk on protocols, but I don't want to leave this presentation to indicate that it is the only parameter. So where does collateral factor do really well? It works really well for large market cap tokens. So established tokens like Ethereum and Bitcoin that have a lot of liquidity, it is really effective at managing the risk of those loans. However, it is not very effective in some of the tail assets, assets that have low amounts of supply, low amounts of liquidity in the market, because the prices of these can be pretty easily manipulated. As you saw under how the health factors were calculated, and as you saw kind of a result of the liquidation cascades, the price of an asset has a huge influence on the speed at which the quality of that asset degrades. So what are some other risk parameters? There are supply and borrow caps. They are not price dependent. They are token volume dependent. There are depth ceilings where a protocol can set an overall risk level that they're willing to assume, potentially in relation to their reserves. And then finally, there are different and interesting ways that interest rate curves can be used to manage risk as well, many of which were talked about in another video by Nick Egan. And that is all that we have for you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we look forward to talking more about risk management in the future.